Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started with our webinar, Design Systems Surviving Turbulent Times. I have a couple housekeeping slides to go through, and then we'll jump into the panel. All right, so before we start, join the Zero Height Slack community, zeroheight.com/Slack, and we can definitely keep the conversation going after we have the webinar. If you have follow-up questions, want to touch more on other topics, feel free to post in our Slack community. And then if you need help at any time during this webinar, you can message Connie Greasley or Jules Mahe, and they will be able to help you. And yes, we are definitely recording this webinar and we will email it to you later. So you'll have that shortly after. And if you need captioning, unfortunately, Demio does not offer a captioning feature, and we've asked them about this. In lieu of that, you can go to Web Captioner. You will have to unplug your headphones if you're using headphones, and the Web Captioner will listen to your computer speakers and provide captions for you. And last but not least, don't be a jerk. We have a code of conduct, and we expect people to be respectful toward one another on this webinar. All right. So upcoming events, we have a couple upcoming events. We have a webinar in September later this month on design systems and AI, a hot topic that everyone is probably curious about. And then next week, we have Converge UK in Manchester. So if you are in the UK area, and you haven't signed up yet, there are still a few tickets remaining for the workshop and the one-day design system conference, which features some really, really rad design system experts. And then at the end of the month, Zero Height will be at Design Matters in Copenhagen. So if you are attending that, definitely come stop by and say hello in person. All right. And also in exciting news, this is the second week of World Design Systems Week, and it will be happening November 26th through December 2nd, so the last week of November. And this is just a worldwide event where we just celebrate design systems and their makers. Events are held worldwide. If you're interested in coordinating an event in your location, please feel free to reach out to us, community@zeroheight.com, and we can put you in touch. This event is a partnership with Zero Height and Figma as well. Okay, let's get to talking. Let me introduce our speakers. So we have really awesome panelists today. We have Mikaila Weaver, who is the principal product designer at Eventbrite and who works on their design system. She's also professor of user experience design at the University of Southern California. And then we also have Davy Fung, who is a product design lead for design systems at Meta and a co-host of the Design Systems Office Hour podcast. And if you haven't listened to the podcast, it's really awesome. I'm Michelle Chin, a design advocate at Zero Height. I also co-host a podcast called UX IRL. And yeah, let's kick things off. So thank you both for joining us. Let me stop sharing my screen. And let's start with some introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your design system experience, what you currently do, and maybe even a fun fact. Let's have Davy start off.
Davy, I'm sitting in Sacramento, California. Raised here and then came back here during the COVID years. I'm a design lead, leading the business design systems here at Meta. So all enterprise all the time, and been here about 1.5 years. Previously, I was a design manager for our design systems at Disney Streaming, supporting Disney Plus and Hulu. And fun fact is I love roasting coffee. So I source my own single origin beans and I make a cup of coffee every day for myself.
Awesome. Mikaila? I don't think I can hear you. I don't know, Davy, can you hear? Okay. Well, while you're figuring that out, Davy, I need to learn how to roast coffee beans. I tried the other day. I had some light roast that I didn't like, so I threw it in a pan, and I did not do a good job. I didn't know what I was doing. Definitely burnt some beans. can't hear you. It was working earlier. Okay, I'll give it a second while she rejoins. Oh, yes. Okay, awesome. Super weird.
Yeah. I think it was that thing where your iPhone can just take over your mic randomly. I kind of caught it doing
Oh my gosh.
earlier. So we're good now, though. Well, hi, I'm Mikaila. I'm a principal product designer at Eventbrite. I'm based in Los Angeles, California, but from Canada originally. And I'm a principal product designer and lead for our design system Marmalade. I got into design systems and I've been doing it for several years in official and unofficial capacities because I sort of came to Eventbrite via a handful of different startups. But I've always loved figuring out how to work more efficiently, work smarter, not harder, since I started getting into product design. So love design systems, always trying to figure that out. And then as far as a fun fact, I'm super competitive. I'm a former D1 athlete soccer player, and I used to build and race drones as well.
Wow, that's impressive. I am terrible at drone flying, so super interesting, learning so much about you both. Thank you for sharing. Let's get started with a question around just general economic uncertainty. So definitely economic downturns, as kind of what we're experiencing right now, can lead to budget cuts. So how can design system teams effectively navigate these budget cuts for tools while maintaining like the integrity and effectiveness of the design system? Mikaila, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I can give a little context that, at Eventbrite in the past year, we've absolutely been impacted by budget cuts. We lost on our design team a lot of our technical staff, and just have to give a huge shout out to all those team members first and foremost, because the first thing you have to acknowledge is you're never doing this alone, right? So Jen, Aiden, Alex, Jesse, Asia, Katie, everybody that's part of Marmalade and makes it happen. We're a super small team. It was a huge impact to us. And I think there's really three things that you have to remember when you're thinking about how to keep going. It's acknowledge, like, there's almost no way to avoid it. You can do everything right. This team was rock stars, great people. We were trained by Dan Mall at Super Friendly. Shout out Dan and Crystal. There's just, you're always more at risk when you work in design systems. So acknowledge sometimes it's beyond your control. And then you also have to be honest with yourself that there's no way you can do the same work with less people sometimes. You have to make sure you're advocating for adjusting goals, scope, all those things to protect yourself and make sure that you have the energy and the resilience to just keep trying to do as best you can. And then, when we were launching Marmalade's a new design system at Eventbrite. We've had other design systems, but this is a new iteration. We knew we needed to plan ahead and pick a tool like zeroheight, so that we were setting ourselves up to maintain this in a super lean way, right? It's not a custom site. We don't need to spend effort maintaining that. We have our content designer doing it, and it's a great tool.
Great. Davy, do you have anything to add in terms of how teams can weather this economic uncertainty?
The hope is that there's someone on the team that is more design ops focused, and I've been tooting this horn for quite a bit, because with the combination of design ops and just documenting your practices, whether they're like wherever you are in the life cycle, like managing components, releases, documentation, education. When the dust settles, someone's gonna have to take that work on, and unfortunately, and I think from Meta, it's been pretty widely known that we've been doing quite a bit of cuts. So like I've been on this show, I've survived like 3 cuts miraculously, but I think the just from like a emotional point of view, like we had most of our design leadership like wiped out, and so how do you continue to proceed? So like you lean back on like the documentation that you had written up until that point. So hopefully like you were able to work with your like directors and your design leadership to develop a 6-month, 12-month plan. Hopefully you're able to start documenting like either like how you build components or how you want to spec components, and then really try to keep that stuff buttoned up so it's ready for the next person. I think the hardest part about this is like during these times there tends to be a little bit of interest to lean on contractors to come in and try to save us. And I think that's something that may not be as positive or as beneficial as just having in-house people continue and rise and do the work, because there's a lot of when you're hiring contractors to just try to come in and execute, there's a lot of overhead involved. So really trying to explain in this situation, when can we lean on external help?
Yeah, that's definitely a great point. I think a lot of times, it might seem like a contractor or contractors might be a good idea to pinch it, but there's quite a bit of onboarding that needs to be done in addition to a scaled back team. And I really like, Mikaila, what you said about having to like rethink about what the goals are and like resetting kind of expectations so people aren't expecting how things were before, and going at the same pace. So let's talk a little bit more about team member loss. So losing team members or even a whole design system team can be very challenging. What strategies can be employed to manage these situations to ensure the sustainability of the design system? Mikaila, would you like to answer that first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mentioned that our team working on Marmalade got a chance to work with Dan Mall and Crystal Vitelli at Super Friendly in 2022. And so I'm going to definitely attribute some of the ideas that I'm sharing to their team. Dan talks about not building a design system graveyard and focusing on building that components that people use, right? With design system work, you're never done. And you're always trying to figure out what's next, what's most important. And if you're still focusing on the user problem, you're going to build components that people actually need and use. And, when we lost headcount, a lot of the promotion or advocacy work that we would do, doing presentations, onboarding people, spreading awareness, that had to decrease substantially. So, we were really lucky that we had done so much of that work already to sort of self-perpetuate a lot of the organic adoption and enthusiasm around Marmalade. I mentioned adjusting the goals and the scope. We lost a lot of our people with technical building capacity. So we focused more in on Figma and our design tooling. How can we improve the experience in Figma for designers while still fostering a federated model where, we could eventually get the technical contributions for some of those changes. Another huge thing is just acknowledging that you need to look inward sometimes, right? And cultivate your own resilience. It's not easy, and acknowledging that it's hard. The most important thing is to keep going sometimes. I read books when I needed to get a boost. I really recommend The Messy Middle by Scott Belsky. Likens working on design systems to being at a startup. Well, he doesn't, but I am making that in comparison right now. Sometimes if you give up too early, it won't happen, right? So you just kind of have to keep going and figure out what your motivating factor is to keep going. And then another great book I recommend is I Didn't Do the Thing Today, recommended by Design Ops Assembly by Madeline Dorr. The idea that, everything always takes longer than you expect, Hofstadter's Law, grabbing that directly from that book. It's not going to be a direct path. If it was a direct path, it wouldn't be as fun to work on design systems, right?
That is a very, very good point. And to people who are listening to these book recommendations, we'll include a link to some of the resources that we mentioned today, along with the recording. And then, yeah, Davy, what's your take on team member loss and kind of navigating and making sure the design system is sustained?
I think the hardest part about this is the the need or the ask from leadership to continue to do the status quo. So I think that's where this all like may fail, right? Like you have to reset. I think anytime there's this turbulent change in reorgs or in team member loss, you have to reset and see. Hopefully, the idea is that you do less. You do a little less, and you focus more on those things. And like Mikaila said, I think one of the major things that we had wanted to drive is we wanted to drive the continued movement of building components and support of those components, because those were two things that we noticed weren't necessarily tied to any other like external factor. So when I say that is management and maintenance of design components and continue to evolve that does not involve engineering to come help us very minimally. Building out support practices, office hours, and continue to working with designers also does not require engineering. Now, evolving components from a functional point of view, I think that's something that unfortunately with team member loss, like on both our design and engineering side, that has been scaled back a little bit.
Okay, yeah. And you know, thanks for that. Like I think it leads to my next question around cross-functional collaboration. So it sounds like paring back a little bit on the engineering side, but at the same time, you know, a design system exists. So how, you know, and even with like broader cross-functional collaboration, their teams are affected too. So how, what other ways are your design teams navigating with other departments to kind of still foster a sense of alignment and shared purpose, even though things are pretty scaled back? Davy, do you have any thoughts?
Hey, I think the assumption like on our larger design teams, right? So like at Meta or Google is that we have lots of resources. And I think in typical times we do. So we have a team, and this is going to sound like a lot of people, right? So we have a team of 7 designers and approximately seven engineers. And like at the peak, those numbers were 10 and 10, 1-to-1, with design managers on both senior managers and directors on both of those. So as the numbers have dwindled 2 to 3 per side, engineering has been a little more strapped on time to work with us. So there's a lot of just day-to-day work to keep the lights on. They have support that they have to provide. So it sort of led us to this time where our roadmaps during team member loss or during reorgs, like that's another common thing here at Meta, is like we get shuffled around quite a bit. Roadmaps become more fluid. So we're a little bit at the time where a lot of our engineers are tied to these larger initiatives, and it's been very difficult to find time with them. The only mechanism that I found that works for us is we have a notion of designer on call and engineering on call, and usually we get paired with the designer and engineer. We're supposed to mostly be focused on supporting people that are outside of the system, but we're also utilizing that time to pair with each other. So those are in 1 week chunks. So we've been very deliberate about asking for help in very snack size pieces that you could do within 1 day or within a week.
Cool. Yeah, I like the snack size piece. It seems a lot more achievable than really kind of asking for more than that during that time period. Mikaila, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think I got really good advice from the former PM of Marmalade, Jen Reicher, about this, which is, you know, sometimes you shouldn't fill the holes if they're taking away all of your, you know, technical capacity, and you try to fill those holes, then the business will no longer see them sometimes if you do truly need those roles, right? That's where you have to advocate for the change in goals, scope, reach, and those sorts of things. So it's really, you know, you have to either reach across harder or make that decision, and it's a scary one because, you know, you want, or at least at Eventbrite, we wanted to hold it so sacred that design and engineering and those things always have to be perfectly matched and in sync. And we will get, you know, support tickets reaching out and saying, hey, you know, like I'm seeing this color named this and that, and we're like, oh, sorry, we're experimenting there. That's an active experiment and it's uncomfortable, we know. And so, you know, just figuring out, okay, what are we okay with not holding as near and dear to our heart in the spirit of like parody or that sort of thing. So I think it's just making those little decisions every day and being okay and acknowledging, you know, not making those decisions without thought, right? You're deliberately saying, I'm okay with letting this go because I do not have this role that I need. And here's the impact to the business and here's the benefit we would have if this were not the case,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's a really good point because I think with design system teams, like we all feel very compelled to make sure the design system's like ready to go for everyone to use and consume and that it can't fall behind. But you know, when we're missing those roles, like, you know, there's this like this urge and this like feeling that we have to fill those gaps and kind of make do. But that can come at a detriment because senior leadership will be like, oh, well, like you mentioned, Mikaila, like you seem to do fine without them. I don't think you need headcount, right? And that can backfire. So I think a lot of teams that I've talked to really try to hold their ground and say, like, we would like to do this, except we don't have these people, to really kind of make that point clear, to explain. So even though it's very compelling to like do the work yourself, like I think it takes a lot to kind of hold back. Um, Let's talk a little bit about, you know, we talked a little bit about like kind of what we do in the interim with the short-term needs. How do we think about long-term goals, um, you know, while we're kind of navigating these short-term needs and can't really get to that long-term vision? Like how are we keeping long-term in mind, or are we keeping long-term in mind? Davy, do you have any thoughts?
The long-term stuff is very difficult because even like if we tend to plan at Meta in 6-month chunks, and I think that becomes a little less risky because you could mostly get to the 4 to 5 month point usually without any sort of churn. But when I was working at Goodreads and working at Amazon, that was something that we tried to plan in a year in advance. So we would try to plan the roadmap, spend 2 months doing this year in advance work, and then a quarter in, everything kind of blows up, and that um, needs to change and needs to be renegotiated. So I would try to plan less in less than 6-month chunks. So I try to plan in quarter-sized chunks, and then see, really try to tie in and understand what is dependent on external factors, whether they're your engineering team, or you might need to partner cross-functionally with a different product team. What is tied to that versus what is tied to something that you and the designers can execute on their own? Because the things like component management, documentation updates, training, support, those are all things that is part of my little sub pillar called Foundations. That is, we manage on our own, and we could decide when to release whenever possible.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. It makes full sense. So I forgot to mention, the second half of the webinar, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and Jules will curate them, and we'll start to take some questions in a couple minutes from the audience. But yeah, I wanted to also talk about, you know, professional development when it comes to people who are on design system teams or are design system makers. Um, so, you know, navigating through these tough times presents opportunities for personal and professional growth. How have you seen individuals within design system teams develop new skills or insights due to kind of like weathering these challenges? Mikaila, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and another one where there's two different paths you can choose to take, a choose your own adventure of sorts. You know, you always have the capacity to stretch your own skills in so many different directions with design systems. And that's one of the things I love about it. But, you know, when you lose head count, or there's this opportunity to take on someone else's, you know, responsibilities, or those sorts of things, it gets a little bit dicey where you want to do your best. You want to make sure you're helping the team still succeed, but sometimes you also have to draw a line, right? Which is, again, that don't fill the holes concept of, I will do this, I won't do that. Because historically, the hardest part of design systems is always focus. It kind of relates to that road mapping question too, and how you connect long-term and short-term is like, it's all about focus. If you're focused on the right things, there's a clear connection between the work you're doing now and the work you want to be doing, or the world you want to build for design systems. So I think it's, again, like, it might be beneficial if you lose headcount, such as in my case at Eventbrite, to take on some of the vision work that our PM was previously doing a lot of the discovery work and problem identification. It's not as beneficial for me to decide I'm going to learn React, right? Like, so just pick and choose and be smart and strategic about the direction you want to grow in and the work that is feasible for you to take on, because the easiest way to feel bad about the work you're doing is to feel like you're not getting enough done when it's not your fault.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think, we can easily panic and go, oh my gosh, we don't have developers, I'm going to have to learn React. But definitely keep in mind your own career goals to see what you can do. Davy, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I want to make sure to add on what Mikaila said, and then Dusky had mentioned something about personal development and like performance reviews. Like I do want to highlight that if you take it on, you got to make sure you get credit for it, because I'm not doing this shit for free. Obviously, I'm getting paid to do my job, but when there's team member loss and you're being asked to take on a different role, you most likely still have to do your own role. So like you really have to pick and choose. You have to say, no, I can't do this because XYZ. And we really want to be able to, if you're taking on the work, be able to talk and strategically sell the narrative about what impact you're providing. So whether that is, I'm able to fill this, like we lost like a program manager, like early on into my stint here, and I came in and I filled in some of the gaps in terms of making sure that we like to say that the design system is a product. So if the design system is a product, what does that mean? So it means that we have consistent communication and comms where we write a certain way, we do release notes, we communicate non-breaking, breaking changes, we provide support mechanisms, and that was something that I feel like I filled the gap, but it directly ties and benefits the foundation's work that I'm doing. So I was okay doing that. I can't fill that gap forever, and we do now have a DPM that has to come in to help. But yeah, just want to make sure that you're able to sell the narrative and make sure that you get credit for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you're putting that in your performance evaluations, are there any metrics that you use to like tell that story of value that you're providing in the interim?
Time is always one that's hard to measure, right? And I spoke to Mikaila previously about this, but like measurement of time, that's always something that people are interested in. How much time or how much money using the system can you save? How many people utilize specific things? So like if you wanted to refactor a specific pattern, you could illustrate how many people from a design side had utilized a pattern, and then you could scrape and see how many times in code this exists, and you could infer impact that way as well.
Okay, yeah, great. So we have a question from, so I'm going to turn it to kind of like, we're transitioning nicely into audience questions. So Gracie has asked if individuals are motivated by taking on new and exciting ventures within the design system for their own professional development, how do you ensure resources are allocated towards addressing tech and UX debt and maintenance or continual incremental improvement of the design system?
Go ahead.
I could take
Yeah.
a stab at that. Yeah. I think it goes back to that focus piece of, your team will reach its long and short term goals if there's a good sense of focus. At Marmalade, everything we do is trying to keep focus, but it bring fun and celebration into the brand of the design system so that people want to contribute, want to engage, want to feel rewarded for anything they do for helping. So when we were doing our, 6 month or quarterly planning, we would always try to find, not always, but the goal was to find some fun thing that everyone can do and focus on that's in line with personal growth or in line with promoting the system or teaching. So, there's always a little thread or narrative arc that you can figure out how to tie things together so that people feel fulfilled. They don't feel like they're a component factory, because retention, happiness, all of that culture that you cultivate on your design system team, it seeps out into the broader system. So I think, the brand we built around Marmalade was key to being able to give ourselves permission to do things that might not be as directly related to the let's increase the adoption numbers, right? But they were. We figured out a way to say this promotional microsite we're going to build is going to be a tool to increase the fun around Marmalade.
Very cool. Yeah, I think you bring up good points about like being a component factory. It can feel like a lot of production work, but if you make room for fun, I think that is really, really cool. That's a great idea. I don't know, Dave, if you've had anything to add to that, or we can jump to the next question.
Yeah, find something that seems like interesting, that is tangentially related, that you could move the ball forward. So like a specific example might be prototyping. So Figma just released like a shit ton of updates on prototyping in Figma, and you could learn and spearhead that initiative to be something that your team takes on. And it doesn't need to be like an official thing, like where, my design system now supports prototyping, but you might be able to get not only yourself training, but others that are interested in prototyping, and get a little group to really drive prototyping in Figma to be something that is better adopted.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a great way to learn a new skill. And yeah, for sure. Okay, let's see. The next question from Nicoletta. If the whole design team is at risk, how do you decide when to fill the gap and when to raise to management, hey, this is too much work for me? Mikaila, would you like to give that one a shot?
Yeah, I think it always has to do with pointing to the business objectives at the very top that leadership cares about. Dan Mall's advice was also to make sure you have executive sponsorship up there, that there's someone at the highest level that can advocate for why this matters. A year ago, it was harder to point to maybe some of the business objectives at Eventbrite that our project directly related to. Today, it's a whole new story. We're focused on the next 3 years, and big changes will be coming to Eventbrite, and that can't happen efficiently or effectively without a design system. So, as long as you're understanding and seeing the connections and able to effectively communicate and advocate that those are in fact connected, it becomes much easier. I think it's the same way all designers have to practice empathy for users. We have to think about our executive stakeholders as users of the system in a really, really far off way, right? But how can you use the design system to get what you want faster? And there's usually always a connecting tissue
Yeah,
there.
that's a really great point, because I think another webinar we had, Lily Dart mentioned, we asked what we should do differently if starting out the design system, and she mentioned getting stakeholders on board and pitching it more toward like an identity brand initiative, not just making components efficient for designers and developers, but really kind of saying like this is really to help the entire company out with the branding identity of the product. So that is a good point. Like, if you don't mind me asking, like, I guess what roles were your stakeholder kind of champions that sponsored the design system?
We tend to lean on our chief product officer. We have, my direct manager reports into them. So, we've had some transitions there, and we're grateful to have also recently hired an SVP of design that will also be a huge advocate for the system. No pressure, Lisa, I'm calling you out. But yeah, I haven't even met her yet, and I'm already placing demands. But here we are. But yeah, you know, it's whoever is close enough to the problem, the business objective that is most important. If it's performance or accessibility, it might be or fall closer to the engineering side of things. I think it just depends where your most poignant problem is at any given time. Tech debt, you might have to get that engineering lead again on your side more. So it just depends slightly.
Okay, great. And Mila has a question around what are the minimum essential roles for restarting a design system team that needs to build a new design system? Davy, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks now that I've been speaking to that are a design system team of one, and I quite frankly, I was a design system team of one for a little bit. It's a pretty similar hero's journey where you start off, you get advocacy, and then hopefully you build upon that. I would love if you start a team with a designer and engineer. So either a designer engineer or a designer and a design technologist. So some combo of that. So you could not only build the design version of these things, but you could really truly execute the vision in code. So if you could have a pairing of those, I think that would be the best. I would love two designers and an engineer as well. But I think one designer and an engineer to have someone to riff off of each other.
Yeah, and Mikaila, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm actually in that exact position where, you know, I was the single person on the team. We scaled up, we had a full team, you know, 2 designer engineer pairs and content designer PM, and then it's back down to me and a content designer, and we're deliberating about what to do. And I would also, you know, to Davy's point, you always want a designer and engineer paired up in an ideal world. I think it's also depends on your skill sets and what gives you energy in your role. Like if you're busy leading the team, you won't have more time to design or code or whatever it is that makes your heart happy. So, you know, I highly recommend a design program manager or a product manager that can help with a lot of the other nuance of like having a functioning team that hits goals and targets long off objectives and figures out how to break down the work to get there. That person is very key if you do not enjoy doing that work, like myself. And then a content designer. It's, you know, half of what we do is documentation, and our content designer on our team, Katie, is a rock star, and she's in here building components and learning different things, you know, that professional growth aspect that we talked about earlier. So just big shout out to content design and PM, DPM roles as well.
Yeah, I think like, you know, and this is like to just reiterate the questions, like if you're restarting a design system, so it's not like this is how you get by. I mean, it might be how you have to get by during this time period, but this is not by any means the only people. Like the more people you have to a certain extent, like the more roles at the beginning, the better. Just because, you know, like we said, design systems are like a product, or if it's like an infrastructure, so it does need all those proper roles that any other product has. And teams that work with many different roles like content design, information architecture, user research, design engineering, like early on have a chance to be a lot more successful than those who are running a little bit more scrappy and minimally. I didn't want anyone to think that they can just start skinnying their design system team, that this is just restarting. All right, so we have another question. So Amo, we have plenty of questions actually. Amo writes, any tips on what to prioritize building in a young design system / component library during these turbulent times? They would like to add that turbulent times in their context is like reduced headcount, lower funding from business, people just not caring and making design systems as a priority. Any thoughts, Davy?
Yeah, I would try to lean on a part of the business that is currently in the next 6 to 9 months looking to evolve somewhere. So I don't know where that somewhere is going. So like in our example, We're looking to move from like legacy Facebook theme to new meta theme, which isn't necessarily new, but then sometimes things like in our large organizations take a long time to roll out. So ideally, we would want to refactor like large portions of the app, like the business tooling apps that we support. The hesitancy to do that, especially if it's an app that makes us money, is the hesitancy is very high. So what can we do? Like, we're trying to get them to adopt things from like the lowest most atomic level. So first off, trying to adopt like color tokens, type tokens, and then starting to go from there and seeing how far we could get. So color tokens, type tokens, then we start going towards like buttons, list cells, and anything that we see in their product that is prevalent and maybe prevalently wrong, and really trying to up level the work slowly. And that way we could be able to run experiments, get it out there, and then sort of tune and pilot as we go along.
Great. And then I guess, Mikaila, you had mentioned when working with Dan Mall, like thinking about the components that are actually being used. In terms of that, Charlotte's asking, are there any ways you currently prioritize like on what comes next in the list of components?
Yeah, and I'll credit Dan again. This is not my thought. This is definitely his. But get in the room with feature teams is what Dan would say, and he's absolutely right, because that's been the silver shining light in this reduced headcount world that our team is operating in, is seeing other designers be like, I want to come in and learn how to build a component, or I want to and then I'm also going to get my engineer to build this because we need it anyways. Like those are the moments that are so rewarding, because you're teaching people new skills. You're practicing this like federated model that a lot of times becomes the reality when you have a reduced headcount. We haven't talked too much about, what happens when there's no one on your team, right? Or that team of one, but anyone can be on your team as long as they get a blessing from their manager to spend some of their time helping. And a lot of people will come out of the woodwork and raise their hand. And I know there was a question too earlier about like, and what happens when people are caring less. I think that reduced headcount and reduced budget are not the biggest enemies. That caring less or that apathy, it sounds like the scariest thing actually threatening one's system. If I were to step back and think about it, right? Because it might be that you need to step back and look at what problems you're solving for users, because if they are really poignant problems that are felt deeply by people, they will care. When our team lost headcount, it wasn't us jumping up and down and yelling. It was everyone else like, no, we need marmalade. What are you doing? And that has also helped keep me going.
Yeah, that's great when you have like external advocates to really champion those efforts. Kind of like riffing on that, like what are some ways to kind of get those advocates, to kind of really rally for you during these times of need?
Yeah, I don't mind speaking to that. I feel super passionate about that. Like, you need to cultivate your brand of your design system to be enduring, to be an accurate mirror of the culture you're trying to create. Marmalade, was come up with in a room in San Francisco, just sitting around laptops and being like, punny, right? It's how we jam together. It's us collaborating. And that is like absolutely the secret to like then being perpetuating beyond a more centralized team, is like, if the answer to how we collaborate is using the design system, then people will turn to that and it becomes self-reinforcing, which is key because you can't do it all yourself. And the other piece is like bring people in. We do an office hours like thing. We call it Governance Guild. That is our federated meeting that happens every 2 weeks, alternating with Front End Guild. And, we do little activities like, name that Pokemon, except it's name that component. And we talk about a component what it should be used for. We get engineers and designers in the same room. We use a fun tool called Mentimeter that's great for like live voting and silliness. And so again, bringing that fun back into the brand and making sure people feel involved, even if it's just voting that a color should be named berry preserves or a component should be named, I don't have a good example right now. Oh, tour guide. We had a tour guide was a notorious one to name.
Nice, very cool. It sounds like a lot of fun to work on your team. And then Davy, we have a question for you from Dusky. If you can kind of go back to the roadmap, can you share an example of how you might plan for a 6-month roadmap? For example, what are the big rocks or things to consider, and how granular do you get when thinking about that 6-month span?
Yeah, perfect. Great question. I have it open right here on the left. So I think the first half's roadmap, when we were in less turbulent times, then this is something that we had planned, I think in November of last year, was breaking out things into like what I would consider like a larger rock. A big rock might be something that takes 3 to 4 months. So 3 to 4 months, and then there's other support things that may take anywhere from less than a month to things that take a week. And an example of the big rock was like, we're going to refactor our web component library to support the new theme. So that was our big rock last half. This half's big rock is to do rinse and repeat. There's a lot of rinsing and repeating. So if something works, do it again a little better. So we're now refactoring the mobile libraries to support the new theme, and looking at the roadmap for our team this half. We did a lot of the heavy component refactoring last half. So a lot of the work now is broken out in even smaller chunks. So things that take no longer than estimated 3 weeks worth of design time, 4 weeks worth of design time. And then that provides us ultimate flexibility where, let's say I think there's approximately 6 things on here that are P0 and P1s that we're intending to do. Like, we're most likely going to be able to do four of these things, and we'll probably have to pick up some other things that will soak up maybe like a month's worth of time and to support other teams. So I think breaking it out into as even 1 week projects and just like sprints on work, I think is very beneficial.
Cool, thank you for sharing that. All right, we have a question from Jessica. We have a few engineering product teams that have had funding cut and can't afford capacity to onboard to our design system, even though their leadership has set a goal for all teams to be onboarded to the design system by 2024. So how can a design system team be empathetic for their scenario and still push them in the direction of adoption sooner than later? Mikaila, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I kind of try to cultivate this spirit on my team, like my design system team as well, where, you know, like, be okay with people detaching instance or whatever it is that isn't your ideal scenario, because there are so many competing pressures in our organizations. And it's the same advice I give with like figuring out which component to build next is get in there, stand ups, get in the room with them, figure out what it is that you could help with, because there's always something. And I'm interpreting onboard here more as like migrate or like need to use the design system tooling. But if it's just, you know, if it's true like onboarding and like teaching them, you know, set up a session, and it really shouldn't take that long, right? If you're doing your work as a team to try to make onboarding easy, make learning to use the tooling easy. But either way, I think it's get in the room with them as much as possible within the bounds of the time that they have available, right? There are your user just as much as a team that might have time. It's just a different constraint.
Yeah, great. And then Davy, do you have any thoughts from your perspective when engineering teams are kind of going through this change and adoption needs to happen?
I mean, I'll touch on the I think the breaking of components was like a specific nuance question. ideally no one would break components, right? But I think we're in a place where we, like Mikaila said, we have to understand the business objectives and the constraints of the product designer. So obviously they're doing it for a reason. So it's our job to figure out like why they're breaking the component. So it might be that maybe they need something that has slots, so they're able to put whatever they need in there. Maybe they don't understand slots. Maybe they just need to reorder and shuffle something. So like when we're evaluating something like this, even from when I have an engineer on call, like we look at something, and if they break it, that's okay, but let's make sure they're not breaking it all the way down the chain. So if they're breaking it just to unlock it so they can manipulate and recompose something, we should talk to them and learn about what we need to build in to make things more flexible. So I think engineering is really gung-ho and really excited about these composition problems and upgrading.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple minutes left. So there is a series of questions about measurements. I'll kind of read them all, and then feel free to, because maybe your answers might overlap with some of the questions, feel free to answer them. So question from David: how should we measure the value and impact of the design system in the organization? And then Mila asks, it's so hard to demonstrate design system investment because it doesn't show its value until there's some building and actually using of it in the apps. And so how do you convince your company to invest in design? And then David is asking what metrics are used to measure the impact of design systems in your organization. So I'll let whoever would like to take on some or part of that first. It's always a tough question and an interesting question.
I don't mind taking a stab first, because I think the first thing is like, it's always going to be different depending on who that key stakeholder is that you're trying to convince. But you should think, or I recommend thinking of your metrics as a North Star at the top and a couple that ladder up to that and provide color and sort of story to that North Star, right? Like, so you might have at Eventbrite, ours is adoption, specifically, number of imports of a component. And then anytime we launch a component, we estimate days saved through user testing. So we're able to estimate, here's how many engineering hours we might have saved through this component. We have a lot more trouble measuring that for designers, obviously. That's the process there isn't as linear, but that's where we need to have qualitative measures to add story to that, or figure out a different way. So like adoption, usability, any sort of numbers that can support the adoption number. That's how we do it. But measure everything and be your biggest hype person, even if you feel like that number isn't where you want it to be or super impressive. It will be eventually. Just keep going.
Yeah. Davy, do you have anything else to add? How have you done measurements?
Yeah, on the design side, I mean, there's some like really quick back and napkin math. So like, especially if you have, let's just say you have dozens of designers, so you'll get pretty good data on a number of like inserts from Figma perspective. You could also calculate, unfortunately, how many detachments there are, and the whole name of the game is to get that number down as low as you can, and then maintain it, right? So an evolution of this was so at Pinterest. So my podcast partner PJ and his team, they developed an open source plugin to measure adoption in Figma. So if you Google Pinterest adoption Figma, I think you could find an article on the Figma blog about it, where they measure, they count the number of nodes elements on a Figma frame, and then they calculate how many components are used within that frame. So that seems like a really suitable next step on that. At Meta, we do something that is fairly similar with an internal plugin. I think measuring also, I think a big portion of the usefulness and the value of our design system team here at Meta, our team is called Geo. I didn't mention that previously, but is the support time. So how can we support designers via office hours, via go into their crits, or via governance and any of those mechanisms. So like you're quickly able to calculate estimated how many like person hours or person days you've help folks, and then hopefully you could tie in and tie into individual designers' case studies as they talk about the impact that they've had working with the design system.
Great. Yeah, that's all really, really great things to think about and consider. I think you can also look at, support tickets that come in, from previously before the design system to see if there's a reduction in bug tickets or something like that might be something. So thinking about historical data as well. So we have a couple minutes and I wanted to wrap up with one final question. So in closing, from each of you, I'd like to hear what's the most important piece of advice you would give to design system practitioners who are currently navigating this economic uncertainty. Mikaila, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think the cultivating resilience is the most important piece, like your own resilience, right? I'm talking about because that's the only thing you control is your attitude that you bring to whatever scenario. And it's infectious. The second that you start feeling like, oh, I cannot handle this amount of work or whatever, like others will feel that. So you have to make sure you're positive and you're excited about the work and you still find meaning and value in it no matter what.
That's great. Davy, what's your take?
Yeah, there's a leadership principle from when I worked at Goodreads where it was always be learning. So I think coming to things like this and showing up, going to office hours and showing up and being present. I think um, the design system space is very, very positive in general, and there's always this thirst for learning and getting involved and trying to help each other out. So I think as you go and you talk to more folks, either through informational interviews and meet other designers, or you're doing your interview loops, I think the thirst for knowledge and curiosity does show. So I think continue that and continue learning however you can, whether it's learning about how to make better design systems, or learning about how to roast coffee, or become a soccer star for those with kids.
Great. Great advice. I think that's really, really great because I think, yeah, definitely how you show up really can affect the rest of the team, and actually, like showing that curiosity, it can get you through some of these really tough times that everyone's going through. And I think the other thing is like, we're all not alone. So definitely feel free to reach out in the design system community if you have questions. Or need help or just want to gut check something, because I think we are all definitely in this together. And you're not the only one going through a lot of this. So I'd like to thank Davy and Mikaila for joining us today for this awesome webinar. It was really helpful. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. We will be sending out a recording of this shortly, in addition to some other links to books and the plugin that Davy had mentioned, and other resources. So thank you again so much for your time, everyone, and we will catch you again soon. All right, bye.